have to ask a lot of questions.
So, pardon?
That means those of you who are there, you'll have to be the ones who ask all the questions.
Exactly. We have to fill the gap. Yeah, this is an unusual time for our MBL lecture. Normally, our MBL lecture is at, as you would know, is 2 p.m. But because 2 p.m. is the midnight in Kirk's where he is, so we shifted to 9:30. And especially now, the topic is very much relevant to us, and that is why it is extremely important for us to engage in the topic. And though we may not have our usual MBL participants, but that is why we are going to fill the gap and ask all the questions and then raise all the issues, all the things to discuss together and with the help of Kirk and in this topic. The topic is responsible use of AI in research and scholarship. It's very timely topic for all of us that engage with scholarship and with AI, and especially with this 𝒓𝒄𝒂𝒄𝒄 and writing assisted writing of the AI and all these amazing things. Though AI still is in a very is not developed as as should be, and it will develop very fast and very soon. At the moment, it's only really for writing or asking them to give you information. It's like my Alexa, but a little bit much. My Alexa is my pet. Everyone says, "Do you have a pet?" I says, "Yes, my Alexa is my pet." But Alexa is very much still is not developed as the AI is, but at least it will develop much further, and especially one of the concerns for us as a Christian in the future will be the generative AI. And hopefully we will have more lecture on AI later on this year, and to discuss what are the what is the Christian responsibility for the world and for the Christian, in the sense of being there for the world and being the gatekeeper from the ethical point of view and moral point of view, and setting the framework from the ethical point of view in relation to humans. And then what are responsibility and how can the church use it? And today is very timely, how the research, how to use AI responsibly for our research and scholarship. First of all, we need to learn how to use it, Kirk. And then secondly, to know how to use it responsibly. Perhaps we would learn it together. Allow me to introduce Dr. Kirk Franklin to you. Dr. Kirk Franklin is actually one of associate faculty member in Global Mission Leadership at OCMS. He has written few books, and most of his books been published by Regnum. Here, there were one of them called Towards Global Missional Leadership in 2017, and co-author in Missional Leadership History in 2022, and the Mission Matrix in 2024. Kirk was born in Papua New Guinea and served as a missionary there. He has had lots of leadership role and governance roles in Australia and global mission agencies around the world. He's also lecturing in missional leadership and doctoral supervising doctoral students based in Melbourne, Australia. And thank you so much for agreeing to give us this lecture, and we are very much looking forward to hear from you. And I hope you had your supper, so you are not, because it is 6:30 there. So, Kirk, the screen is yours.
Okay. Well, hello, everyone. And yeah, apologies that this has to be a little bit earlier. Otherwise, you get me at midnight, and me at midnight is not a very good time for me. But greetings from Melbourne, winter in Melbourne. And I understand our weather here is probably not much better than your weather in Oxford right now. I'm going to share the screen because that makes it a bit easier. Then you can see what I'll be looking at. I assume you can see that all right, the slide. Yep. So I won't repeat the topic that's been set for us. This is a little bit different for those of you who were there last week. I'm aiming this more for a wider audience. We had a separate run through for faculty of OCMS. I'm going to look at, and this was in the publicity, but three framing issues or questions that interrelate. You know, they overlap with each other. The whole idea that I'll be approaching is looking at generative AI. We'll look at the risks, but we'll also look at the opportunities, and particularly from scholarship and research point of view, whether we're actual students doing PhDs or whether we're mentoring those or supervising those who might be, or lecturing or in other aspects of academia, particularly in mission studies. I won't be going beyond that field. And one of the things, as Sarah's already pointed out, things obviously are developing very quickly. And if you're watching this space, you're already aware of that. There's new developments happening by the day. And the pundits, those who favor the direction of generative AI, see this as a once-in-a-generation opportunity for anyone, really, any organization, churches, educational organizations, companies, and whatever. And the amount of money that's being invested in it and the economic benefits that are being paraded about it means that it's actually quite difficult to keep up. Just in the last few months of working through this material that's changing literally daily. So right now, basically we have to say this is kind of a state of play on 9th of July, and it will look very different even tomorrow. As we approach this topic, I approach it with some caution, some concern, but quite a bit of curiosity as well. I also commend to you, if you haven't already seen it, a previous MBL lecture with Dr. Vinoth Ramachandra. I can't recommend it enough. I highly recommend, if you haven't seen it, you can access that through OCMS's website. I am not going to repeat his material. He's done it far better than I can, and he's approached it very well as a theologian, and particularly looking at the ethics. I also commend to you Dr. Gwitchun Jun, who's there in the room at OCMS right now, but the work he's done with the Lausanne movement around digital spaces and discipleship, commending Lausanne for even focusing on that. I will likewise not be addressing any of those issues either. So let's get started with some of the things around the practical use. When we approach it this way, we can sort of see that the line I'm going to take is that we should embrace AI's full potential, generative AI's potential. But in doing so, I think the challenge we're going to be facing is how do we keep the human in the loop? What is our role in this process? How do we use it as a helpful tool rather than a crutch or a replacement? How do we preserve human judgment in this process? Now, those who you know are advocating the use of AI will talk about three primary ways that it can be used in terms of generative AI. The idea of the centaur, where the role is divided, not necessarily equally, but divided between the human and between the AI tool, back and forth perhaps. There's a clear definition or delineation of labor. So the human knows what they're good at, and they also know what to interact with the AI about. Or the cyborg, where it's more integrated. There's more of a blending going on. So much so that at times we may not even realize which is human, which is generative AI, because of that aspect of blending. However, those who are concerned about this space would say humans are still really needed. We're competitive enough that we warrant being kept around and not being replaced. And then the other mode would be the self-automator, where AI is just doing everything. It's been delegated a task, perhaps crunching a lot of data. humans are not really needed once that handover is made. So with those three in mind, just keep those in the background of how we could approach AI. Now, AI has an incredible amount of terminology, and I don't want to bore you with it. I just want to give you a few words to hang on. Obviously, AI itself, a word's well used. We understand it's about how technology, particularly computer systems, are being trained to simulate human intelligence. We are particularly looking at the narrow intelligence. That's the space right now. Those who are working as data scientists and so forth will be aiming for the general intelligence and later the super intelligence. And I guess no one quite knows when that day might come because of the sheer amount of computing power and training of the models that will be needed. And then generative AI, that's the part we're really looking at now. And that's the part that's mimicking, because that's really what it's trying to do, is mimic human thinking, so much so that it sounds like humans are actually generating the material. AI relies on algorithms, which are simply the rules that instruct the machines what to do. We have all sorts of aspects of how the machines are learning from the data, how they're remembering it, how they're making connections and so forth. And that's represented in some of these different terms that you see on the screen, but I'm not going to go through them in any detail. And then the transformer architecture, this is really where it started making a difference. This was proposed in 2017 by some Google engineers, and it's really what's made what we have today possible in terms of generative AI. And it uses it's provided the basis for large language models to be trained on content or on data, using text available to it, digitized form, and then learning those texts using tokens, which are simply words or parts of words where there are patterns that are stored and associations made with those patterns so that through the LLM, it can start figuring out, based on the prompts we offer, what it is that we want to know from the technology. Now, every time we use generative AI, we are actually giving it feedback. We're giving the model feedback. If we like the result, like we copy it and use it, then the machine knows we liked the feedback or found it useful. But we can also reject it or ask it to try again. All that goes into a learning loop that is somewhat moderated by humans, often poorly paid, I might add, who sort of look at all that data and assess and keep adding to the training of the model. On the screen are some of the most popular general purpose technologies that run off the LLM. So this is what GPT stands for. And currently, roughly about 20 LLMs are in development, and the ones on the screen are probably some of the more popular ones. And ChatGPT became the most famous because it kind of got in first in November 2022. Now, you can expect these models to keep developing. There'll be new versions coming out all the time, and new players will come on the scene regularly. But there's also platforms that are drawing from LLMs like ChatGPT, and that would be Grammarly. I don't know if you've used Grammarly, but I started using it a few years ago, and basically it was great for grammar checking, spell checking, punctuation. But now, because it has AI capability added to it, it can actually start rewriting, restructuring whole paragraphs, whole documents, if you wanted to. And then you've got players like Apple creating sort of a closed intelligence system that will be coming out, and we can expect more and more of that happening. All of these obviously cost millions and millions, if not billions of dollars to create, to develop, to train. And consequently, what you can expect is while we'll start out free, being able to use these for free, pretty quickly, some of the advanced features we're going to have to pay for on a subscription basis. So if you want the best ChatGPT, the fastest, the most reliable, then you do the subscription of it. And that's pretty much seems how it's going. There are some tools based on these LLMs that are actually quite useful for us in research. I've got those up on the screen. A couple that are well worth looking at would be ResearchRabbit or Perplexity, simply for the way they find the material, the way they reference it. But we can expect this just to continue to grow. We can expect resources such as 𝒂𝒂𝒂. It has an AI add-on, so referencing software, places, things like that, we can expect those to keep having AI capacity being added. So some principles for using generative AI would be to make sure we're always the human in the loop. This is important for curation, the critical thinking aspect, obviously important for ethical considerations. But it's good to treat generative AI like a fast learning intern, but prone for making errors. And so it needs to be guided by us until we really get a handle on how it's operating. It's also good to think of whatever version and platform you're currently using will be the worst AI you will ever use because it's continuously developing so quickly. That's kind of been my experience so far. If you've never used a generative AI platform, this is what one looks like. This is ChatGPT's interface. And at the bottom is the screen where you would type your prompt. We call that a chatbot, or bot for short. In this version, you can actually also upload documents. You see the paperclip symbol. You can also copy in websites and that sort of thing, and then it will analyze that data. In prompt writing, those who are kind of specialists in this field would say it's good to be really clear, to be specific, use some scenarios to guide it. Who's the audience of the material you're looking for can be helpful. You might want to keep refining results if you're not happy with the first reiterations of them. Some would advocate you only ask one question at a time. I've actually asked multiple questions at a time just to see if it can handle it. The free models often will work slower than the paid models. So sometimes you just got to allow it to think a bit, and it may take a little bit longer to process. Let me give a few examples then of some very simple things that one can do in AI. This is before we get into issues of ethics and other things like that, but just at a very basic level. So this is an example of doing some qualitative data analysis with a document that's text. It's some notes, and I'm looking for some key terms, and I put that in the prompt, which is what I've got there in green, and then it generates for me very quickly after reading the document I've uploaded, and it gives me the references for those quotes, and I can obviously go check and make sure it got it right. In this case, it did, and I've also edited it. I'm not giving you everything it generated. Another example would be getting some input from a draft presentation or article, uploading it and telling it who the audience is for, whether they maybe, in this case, they may not have much interest in the topic, and then what would it recommend for some changes or some improvements. And so then again, it spits it out, and you've got some data to work with and make some decisions whether you're happy with its help. Another example, a very easy one, would be sometimes we get stuck in writing our work. And in this case, I was stuck on my last paragraph, my closing for this particular presentation or paper. And so I gave it three possible audiences, and I asked it to write a concluding content and just one paragraph long. In fact, I could have said 50 words or 40 words, and it would do that because it's very accurate in that respect. I always treat this as drafts, never as final content, but these are just examples that can be done quite quickly. Another one could be where you're just simply trying to get a handle around maybe a journal, and you have it in digital form. And so I upload that, and I ask ChatGPT I give it 4 questions. You see the questions on the screen, and then you see its results, its responses. And I ask it to give me the bibliographic information so that I'm making sure it's quoting that article and not something else that's found out in cyberspace. Now, whether it's accurate or not, that's a totally different question. We'll get into that in a moment. But this is the result. It happens very fast, and it helps you at least decide, is this article worth doing further reading on or not? So let's look at some of the biases and those sort of issues, because this will often come up, particularly when we're looking at scholarship from around the world. Before we get into that, just people who are maybe concerned. I think this particular scholar is concerned about what's happening with AI, but seeing that it's actually data now is described as the new oil because of its value. And all of it's right now concentrated in the hands of the big tech companies like Meta, Google, OpenAI, Microsoft, all, of course, based in the United States. And so that's a concern. What are some other concerns? Bias would be almost always will stand out as one of the chief concerns. And there's all kinds of reasons and ways that we can approach bias. Let me just mention one or two. One would be the fact that the owners of the LLMs, as I said, are in the United States. They are politically liberal. They are Western. They are pro-capitalist, very white. And therefore, that may be biasing the data. That's up for debate, because they're obviously aware of this and they're obviously trying to mitigate biases. Another one that comes through sometimes is its cultural insensitivity of LLMs because of the training they've gone through, the data they've been reading and digesting, which is primarily English. Whatever's available, whatever can find, obviously starts biasing the data. And so that's why that comes out. And whenever you're trying to deal with non-English data, it may not have much of that, or what it's generating may actually be machine translated, much like Google Translate does. And so it may not actually be reflecting some of the cross-cultural concerns, issues, and so forth that we might be interested in mission studies, and particularly from low resource environments, which would be far underrepresented in that data collection and learning of the LLMs. Another concern that you'll often hear about is what's called hallucinations. So these are factually inaccurate, they're incorrect, they're nonsensical, they're unrelated outputs to the inputs you've given. However, they usually sound really convincing. For example, yesterday I was running an experiment where I asked GPT to give me a story, a human interest story, short, of a particular famous figure. It spat it out very quickly. I read the story, it was very convincing. I was ready to use it. But then I couldn't find, when I did my own investigation, any reference to this particular story. So I went back to GPT and said, please give me the source of this story. It came back and said, I made it up. It's based on some things this person did, and I thought you might like it. That's pretty much what it said. I'm paraphrasing, but it's close to its actual words. So I said, but I want a real story, and it came back and said, actually, there isn't one that I can find that meets that criteria. So this would be examples, and some of the people I've talked to who really put off by using GPT in a generative sense is for this reason. And then I'll say, but did you check? Did you ask it to verify? Or did you just accept what it gave you and you knew it was wrong? Another aspect is what they call anterograde amnesia. It cannot remember often what it's already given you. It doesn't reflect on it, learn from it, remember past interactions. I'm finding that's changing a bit. I think the developers are quite aware of that. You're aware of some of these other issues, but saturation of data, the data will start degrading unless it can find new sources of data. Right now, it's almost exhausting the learning from free sources of data. And so this is going to add to the high costs, let alone the legal issues of looking at copyrighted material, material behind paywalls, and so forth. There's also the whole need for critical thinking, digital literacy. I'll cover that a bit more in a moment. The whole issue of over-reliance on technology. Is there a risk that the more we use it, the less we will use our own brains and our own abilities and become very, very dependent on technology. And what about intellectual property? Who's going to get credited for the creation of some of this content when it might be more of the machine than us? What about leakage of information into the public domain that's been created by the models based on our work? So this is going to get more and more complicated. And so organizations like OCMS and any institution that's going to be supporting scholarship has to work through a number of factors. Things like fairness. How do you reduce the bias so that there are these diverse perspectives, particularly in an organization like OCMS or Mission Studies, those of us involved in that? How do we make sure content isn't biased? So you see all the different factors there that are going to have to be looked at. And then there's a governance issue as well. The institutions that are providing degrees and so forth have to make guarantees to their authorities above them who are crediting them that there's not a slippage in the value of the degree that they're offering. And so there's going to have to be a beefing up in the governance area as well. And then there's all kinds of ways we can misuse AI in scholarship, even as Christians. We can cheat with it. We can create misleading content. We can perpetuate the biases however we like. So we're going to have to think more and more about issues like guidance and supervision. How do we ensure that we're not losing critical thinking and ethical judgment? How are we going to make sure there's regulations and that make sure there's transparency? How do we make sure that things are staying safe and we're not losing data, and we're not, how are we going to get through some of the legal ambiguity? So these are in front of us as well. The potential for academic fraud is huge. There was a test done with the latest iteration of ChatGPT, so that's 4.0. It caused very great concern in the research community because it was able to write academic essays that were nearly indistinguishable from those produced by humans. So this raises the question around research fraud. It raises the question, of course, around plagiarism detection systems. Will they be able to keep up with the development of the LLMs who are quickly trying to work around these various detection processes? Where are Christians in this space? How are we bringing in our values of the dignity of the human? How are we engaging in these issues in active space so that we do get a say and we make sure we're heard? But at the same time, I would argue that there are some really important ways that generative AI and the use of it is going to be helpful to current and future scholars. One would be simply be in skill development. How do we use it well and learn to use it well so that it can actually enhance the work we're doing? And even when we finish our work, maybe if we're finishing our PhD, how can we then use it for other purposes? That is our learning on AI. Learning about ethical awareness, just the fact that we're talking about it and starting to think about it is going to be very helpful. The innovation and adaptability that's going to come through us being able to use AI tools responsibly is only going to increase, and that gives us all kinds of opportunities in that space. And AI, I think, as well, has a space in helping us if we have learning challenges, if English isn't our mother tongue and we want to break down complex English instructions or sentences so we understand them better, at least to begin with. I think it can be very helpful in that regard. And then my third point is, well, what about pushing further into this responsibility? How can we do this well? Here are a few thoughts on that as well. I think there's ways that we can support scholars in their usage and engagement with AI. And this would include the literacy around technology. What some of those terms I've already covered. What is really going on to create these outputs so that I have a better understanding of them and perhaps I can use my tools more proficiently? Or the flexibility of actually, can I have permission to experiment here with AI or not? And what would be some of the ethical frameworks around that that would allow me to do that in a way that I'm taking good stewardship or responsibility? And then the ongoing learning, because after all, whatever we're learning right now may be out of date or built upon very quickly, and so it needs to be a continuous process. And there are ways that GPTs are going to be helpful in our scholarship work. They can help us with time-intensive tasks, such as analyzing large textual data sets, identifying themes and patterns. It can do very, very quickly. It can generate codes in our data very quickly. It can actually help reduce workloads where that can be quite onerous tasks. We can actually get it to help us. It can provide consistency. It can find errors. It can find weaknesses in our arguments. It can actually take on a subjective role. We can ask it to be like another reader of our work and give it a persona and ask it to reflect on our writing and see where we can improve it. And therefore, how our outputs are interpreted, how our findings are improved, it can help us in that, and it can help us write better. It can help us in the dissemination of that writing in due course. What about if we approach AI from a higher learning aspect? I'll just use the Bloom's taxonomy because that's quite a well-established one. Some pundits of AI in the education space say that AI can actually already achieve all of the taxonomy, including the highest level of create, which they would add includes synthesizing. Whether that is true or not, I tested ChatGPT 4.0 recently and asked it to tell me whether it could achieve all of the levels of the taxonomy. And it actually said back that it couldn't do evaluation because its capacity or capabilities are constrained in that regard. And that would be true from my judgment so far, that it lacks that ability or that process to really give a deep understanding of data and see connections and patterns and create a new theory out of that. But I would argue if that is true, it won't be for long. And so perhaps those like Charles Fadell and others who say it can already achieve all of this may be closer to the truth. Well, how would we use AI responsibly as scholars? This is not policy from OCMS or anything like that. But as we grapple with the topic, there may be ways to simplify what it is we're actually trying to say here. Some people advocate this traffic light system, red, yellow, green. So obviously red means the scholar is not using any AI. Now, they may make that choice, but the institution may say, you cannot, for this project or process, whatever it is, you cannot do it. Or a green light approach. You can use anything you like. You don't even need to tell us. Just go with it and convince us that it looks really good. I would advocate probably we're looking more at the middle, the yellow, but I'm not sure which. And I think it depends on the different situations. And again, this is where the institutions will end up having to give the guidance as to what's acceptable. But it could vary depending on something like it can be used to help generate ideas and structure, but it cannot create final content. It can be used to maybe help with editing, but it can't be used to create anything new out of that editing. Or it could be used to augment the work of the scholar. And it could create new content, but that would somehow need to be referenced and tagged. And therein, of course, comes a whole set of new issues of how are we going to reference what AI did and what we did and so forth. So anyhow, I think that we may see more and more of this sort of traffic light approach, already seeing it in primary and high school, seeing it a little bit in bachelor level and master's level courses as well. And then developing discernment, moving right along here, that if we're going to use AI responsibly, then obviously there's a process we've got to learn of assessing the sources, if we're going to use it, as I've indicated already, we can't just take it at first value, what it generates. This creates discernment. How do these algorithms work? How is bias influencing the various results? How are we going to articulate our own self-awareness and skills and adjust that as we go through this self-assessment so that we are able to mitigate through extreme positions on whether we use AI or not? We'll find that we're often working with people who are champions for it and others who hate it. And how are we going to have those dialogical skills to negotiate and to fairly represent perhaps the good things we see we want to do when we're using it? A few more examples. If we were going to do a literature review, we can use various versions of the LLMs, and some could be like Research Rabbit or Perplexity AI. We're simply asking it to start generating for us or finding for us sources. In this case, very simple source question: journal articles, discuss collaboration, nonprofit settings. I gave no date range. I gave no author range. I gave no publication range. I could have done all of that and dug deeper and deeper and deeper. This is simply just a quick demonstration. Another one, in the early phases of PhD research, where the student and the supervisors are just wrestling through what's the topic going to be, how are we going to frame it, what are the research questions, and these can get buried away in endless documents and get lost. I've used AI just to kind of isolate those, analyze them, structure them, compare them, and then guide the student, particularly where, again, if English isn't the person's mother tongue, it can be quite helpful. Or we have to teach a course, a unit, whatever, and we want some discussion questions at the end of the topic. It can generate those very, very quickly, like it has in this model. However, we may not use it, or we may only use part of it, but at least it's something that maybe unsticks the brain if we're a bit tired and couldn't come up with something. In publishing a book, we used it last year for a book published this year on just coming up with the title of the book by feeding in data from the book. And then it made this recommendation. We used some of the recommendation, and then on the screen in the red boxes, which you probably can't read, is how we reference that within the book itself. We can also use AI for image creation. Sometimes just some slides, pictures for your PowerPoints or whatever. These are two different examples. One uses a simple prompt on the left, and one uses a more complex prompt on the right. I think it can give you acceptable results, but more and more that we're going to start getting tired of AI-generated images until the creators, the developers, kind of make them look more realistic or more look like a photo might be or painting might be. These are sort of hybrid, and they kind of have that look about them that we're seeing more and more of. Well, as I close, so we can have some conversation, is advocating for a redemptive use of AI. And this comes from people like Andy Crouch and others, is that just a few thoughts, that it informs, generative AI informs without replacing the human agency. We're not removing ourselves from that equation. It's helping us with our cognitive capacity. It's perhaps pushing us in new directions as we use it responsibly. It might be giving us even better solutions or answers. It might help unstick us at certain points. But we need to respect the human embodiment in this process. And it needs to help us with our personal relationships, so we're not replacing those relationships with the machine. It may help in restoring trust in institutions where AI can promote transparency. So where transparency is really important, it can bring respect to those institutions. And could it, in time, benefit the global majority? Is it technology that ultimately is inexpensive enough that no matter where you are, even if all you have is a mobile phone data plan, you might still be able to use it for some of your work? Will we get to that stage? If you want to do some further reading, 3 different types of book. One that Ethan Mollick's book really promotes the use of generative AI, particularly in education space, including writing books and so forth, gives lots of good examples. Kate Crawford's book, she gets into the concerns, the political concerns, the planetary costs. She's not a Christian. I don't believe any of these 3 are, but she approaches it from sort of what is this really costing us in terms of lithium, mining, energy use, water use for cooling all the computing, those sort of concerns. And then the other author, Joy, she looks at what's going on behind the scenes in the tech industry and research sector. And she looks at racism, sexism, colorism, ableism, and how big, broad swaths of humanity are being what she calls excoded and therefore vulnerable in this rapid developing AI world. There's also a lot of free resources. If you haven't tried anything yet, go to YouTube. There's some channels there, or online courses. You can find things through LinkedIn. Just getting into the frame of mind of how to use it, getting going, getting started, diving in. There's so much material available that you can access. So I'm going to stop sharing at this point. We can go back to any of those slides, but I'm going to turn it back over to you, Sarah.
Thank you so much. That was brilliant and very practical and very timely for us all. And I'm sure many of us have lots of questions and lots of issues to raise here. Actually, when I was doing my PhD, I did use Grammarly. And it was really very helpful. The reason because English is not my language. And it also helps my proofreader, because then you don't send really a kind of very jumbled things to your proofreader or to your editor helping you with English. And Grammarly was very helpful for me during my PhD. I have a few questions or issues to raise, but again, I'm going to give really priority to our scholars here because that is their time and it's all about researching and all about this. And I just leave it there. The only thing I like to really mention here is in relation to the bias, because around this table and on our screen, a majority of us are really not from the English-speaking world. And do you think AI will create more gap between non-English and English world in relation to the scholarship, and especially when it comes, because that is what we're doing here, is in relation to the theology or missiology or these things, because everything is in English. And those who are, their English is good, generate much faster and have the materials in their dispose, because any of those things you're talking, you have to pay. You can't really generate the picture without paying that. And all those things are paid. And majority of us, we don't have that much money to pay for that. So those who have money generate more and influence more in our part of the world, majority world. And do you think there will be, we're talking about digital gap, our theological gap will also be bigger, and even those who are sitting around the table will contribute to that gap, because some of us, you are using it and again contribute to that gap. What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, thanks for the question. And I think it's probably one of the really fundamental ones for organizations like OCMS. In an ideal world, obviously, we would hope that it wouldn't be too long where we wouldn't have these concerns about cultural and linguistic biasing. But so far right now, at least some of the studies seem to show that, like a linguist here in Australia did a study recently looking at, in the high school education space, the linguistic biasing that was happening for people who came from non-English backgrounds. And the point of the scholar's work was to say, well, all the training that the models had gone under, 99.9% of it was dealing with English words, the English language, because that was the plethora majority of material available. And so naturally, it's going to be a problem to make that equitable or to serve the smaller languages. I think, though, where things might change is where we're not thinking so much of the wide open LLM models, but the closed models, where it's not out looking about everywhere, but you're training it with your own data, with your own material that you may have already published or have access to. And of course, everything has to be in digital form for it to be useful. And so there are models like Dante AI and others that are more closed, and you can upload that material and then start analyzing that and using that almost to train it to become more familiar with. In my case, I've done it where I'm wanting it to be familiar with my writing style and how I frame things. And so it was restricted just to material I've written. So there's that possibility as well, that I think those will become more and more available. And the comment on the cost, I think that, yes, there is a cost to the better models, but I know for myself, I only started paying recently just because I wanted to see, could I do better or generate better if I paid a little bit? I think it's around 20 US a month. There was some difference, but I think there's also ways to use the free end. You're more limited in what you can do per day, but that may be a way of accessing at least. If you don't have the financial resources, you're not actually prevented. There are even generative AI image creation, like Muse AI. They may not be real great, but I've used them, before the paid ones. So my hunch is that we're going to see a lot of the free platforms available and continue to be available. At the same time, we're going to see the better ones be the paid ones. And I guess it's how do we mitigate that? And if the costs aren't great, is there a way that we're going to add that capability to our students, to our scholars, as part of their learning experience? So those are obviously policy questions. But all that to say, yes, it's a factor. I don't expect it, though, to be stopping us completely. Others may have had other experiences in this space.
Yeah, thank you so much. I agree with you. The technological literacy is very important.
Yeah, thank you, Kirk, for your.
And before that, sorry to stop you.
Yeah.
Can I ask the online people, if you have any question, please use the reaction button in your computer, raise your hand, and I will call you to unmute yourself and ask your comment.
So thank you, Kirk, for your excellent presentations last week and this week. And it is very much informative, and I learned a lot of theoretical and also practical tips from your presentation. So in terms of the ethical concerns that you mentioned, it is all about how we can use the ideas and data and information and contents generated by AI in a responsible way. So that is your presentation. But on the other hand, there is another ethical concern about uploading our stuff onto AI. You showed the chatbot, and so we can upload our documents. And there are many scholars here in our organization who are dealing with really confidential stuff. So when they upload those kind of documents onto AI, how secure it is, and AI, what does it do with those documents? Do they share those documents with other people?
Well, if you're using, the common ones like Copilot or ChatGPT, obviously they're not in any way trying to prevent that material from just going straight into their learning processes. Where it's just amalgamated with everything else that they've got, the question would be, can it still be used against somebody or a scholar? Is it revealing information that is so sensitive it should? And so I would argue that probably, unless we find, and there would be some more closed systems, and Apple, with its Apple Intelligence, is almost advocating this way of concealing or consolidating so that it's not just, freely going out there. My hunch would be that we would see more and more development in this space for these very reasons, because governments face this. Anybody dealing with data security is facing this problem or this dilemma. We recently here in Australia, the education department just this week said that teachers, high school teachers, could not use AI for marking students' assignments because that's privacy matters. That's the student's name and their material, and so they can't use it because of this very concern. So if you see an education department saying that about high school assignments, you can imagine why data that scholars are dealing with is even more of a concern, and therefore need to be more careful with. There are ways perhaps to still deal with the issue, and that might be to strip the material of anything other than generic names or code name, using just a letter of the alphabet or so forth, and it's not giving away a name or a location or something like that, but it's looking more for an analysis around the structure, the argument, so forth. So I think more experimentation has to be done, but I also think we will find more dedicated AI platforms that are saying they are secure. Whether we believe that or not, I think this is another area we're still learning that unless we develop that ourselves, or we have some people with deep pockets who can do that for us, we probably have to be very careful in what we trust with the AI systems. But again, some of you online may have some experiences with that.
And we have Robert. Yes, please. Unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. I've since January, I published 32 books using ChatGPT. So I think I qualify to say something about this. And also, 3 weeks ago, I did a lecture at Presbyterian Theological Seminary in America. And I wrote a book called How to Use ChatGPT Writing Academic Paper Legally and Ethically. And that was published, and I did a lecture. And school decided to accept that as their textbook and use it, and also become a policy. So just an example, this is Jesus and Kierkegaard book that I published, and I give ChatGPT credit, Robert O and ChatGPT. And this is a result of, I started a Kierkegaard Research Center in Korea 2 years ago, and I've been carrying in an Excel file Kierkegaard philosophy, and I want to make a children's book, A through Z. And so when I start using, and it does all the graphic, and I asked ChatGPT, and then the ethical part is this. I already published about 3 books on Kierkegaard, so I would dump in my book into ChatGPT, and out of my book, can you do A through Z of Kierkegaard philosophy for children? So A, authenticity, B, belief, C, choice, D, it should be despair, according to Kierkegaard, but I said there'll be hard language for kindergartners, so we decided on decision and all that. So ChatGPT did for that. I've been writing commentary on Psalm using Pastor Pang. Now, this is really a fantastic aspect of it. I've been translating Pastor Pang, a Korean saint who died at 104 and left us with 114 books. And I got copyright to translate all his books into English, except it took me years and years and years to translate. Now what I do is I dump a chapter of his commentary, and then I call my ChatGPT Charlie. So I said, Charlie, translate into English. And it translates. And I already wrote a chapter of commentary on that. And I say, incorporate both and ask high school level question for Cambodian Bible school students. And it does that. And so there's the ethical issue is not issue with, it's really for me, the difference between typewriter and word processing. So, and this is a textbook I wrote on Holy Spirit God in the mission field in Cambodia, because I'm writing tons of textbooks that out of my PhD at OCMS, I wrote an Regnum published it. And honestly, if I give my Regnum book to my Bible college students in Cambodia, they will say, what in the world are you talking about? It does not make any sense because they are ninth grade level. So I turned my Regnum, PhD Regnum publishing, chapter by chapter, and I asked ChatGPT, now can you make it into ninth grade level? Ask a reflective question. And so it did. It's brilliant work with all the graphics in color. Now, this is a fascinating part. Out of the 32 books I published this year, this probably is the best. Now, this is in Cambodian. So this is a 4-year project. I've been carrying Cambodian proverbs for 4 years because I did my PhD at Cambodia, church planting. And 2009 on, I met 120 Cambodian pastors interview. And I was in the Kokong, it's a village in Cambodia. And this young pastor says, sir, Cambodian Buddhist monks are carrying Bible these days and bring all my church members back to their temple. I said, how is that possible? He said, Cambodian monks are now bringing Christian Bible and tell the parents of the church members, children, and said, if your children go to Christian church, then they'll have to follow the word of Jesus that if you want to follow me, then you must hate your parents. Do you want that happening to your children? Say, oh, no, no. And so I said, brother, but do you think that's what he meant? And because Cambodia, there's a Cambodian proverb that says, if you want to learn, kill your teacher. So I said, does your proverb literally means kill your teacher? Oh, no, it's an exaggeration. Well, that's Hebraic exaggeration of Jesus. Well, I couldn't just say that way. He said, oh, no, how come we don't teach that in Bible college? So for the last 4 years, I collected 300 Cambodian proverbs. And I've been struggling with it for 4 years. And finally, beginning of the year, because I start paying ChatGPT $20 a month, I think it's the greatest investment in my life. and then I asked ChatGPT, hey, this is the Cambodian proverb, and this is English translation, and we put Bible verses on every Cambodian proverbs. And I told them, make it into a teaching material for elementary student. And then I said, make that into children's story. Make sure that Cambodian all elders are the heroes and sheroes of the story. And then I said, make a children's sermon out of that. So this is 52 weeks of Cambodian proverbs. So now we're changing our mission policy. When we go to Cambodian village, we do not bring Bible because it's offensive to the Buddhist. Because they said, oh, that's the Western, that's white people's religion. So we bring this book in Cambodian and meet the village chief, who's oldest, and then tell them, can we teach Cambodian proverbs to your kids? And they said, open, welcome, come on in, And actually, once we start, this is 52 weeks. And so I wrote 1,300 pages. I got 4 volumes working. This is the first volume in Khmer. The second volume is already translation done. So to me, I think if we could use it in the mission field ethically, correctly, and I taught at American Evangelical University this term, and I had 70 students. The first lecture is always how to use ChatGPT and write your paper. And of course, out of the 70, I think I gave about 3 or 4 people complete F because they did not bother going through my standard. And they basically let ChatGPT write a paper for them. So, and I've used ChatGPT so much that when I read, I know Charlie wrote it, And so I said, I write back to them. I said, you ran the whole 12-page by Charlie, and I told you not to. Is there a correction can you make? Because once you put all your data, personal data, and have them help you to write, that's okay, because it makes a brilliant paper. And my students from 8 different countries, it's painful to read some of those people's paper with broken English. But I rather read something that it is very well written, but it talks about them. It talks about their data, their experience, their information, and their, So to me, personally, ChatGPT has been an incredible blessing. So that's all I want to say.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience. Wow, you wrote 32. I think you broke the record. And any other questions or comments online and here in the room?
I'm wondering if Dirk could comment on what he's written into the chat, if he's able to do that.
Yes,
Yes,
can you please? Yes.
Yes. I have done extensive research, not in mission work, but in Afghanistan. And some of the data was confidential. And then I used ChatGPT to summarize the outcome of the interviews that I conducted. But I specifically instructed the program not to use my data set for learning. So that is a certain level of confidentiality. Although other users have suggested that actually what happens behind the scene, of course, I do not know. And that is clear. But at least it's one level of security. So that's my dime's worth.
Yeah, and you've put in the chat message the instructions you use, and if I understand it correctly, did you find that within ChatGPT, OpenAI gave you that wording, or is that wording you came up with?
No, that's the wording from ChatGPT. If you Google how to do this, there's another thing, Kirk, you referred to it. If you have a specific data set and you want ChatGPT to only use that, you again have to instruct the program that it cannot use everything it has found elsewhere on the internet. And there's a clear difference. When I once forgot to tell ChatGPT to only use my material, it came up with findings that I knew didn't come from my field research, because I had first read all the material myself. So I knew it wasn't correct. So you also have to be very specific about which data set it can use.
Yeah.
But thank you so much, Dave. One of the things which is the not to use the data, it doesn't mean that they are not storing your data. And can someone else or other data company access to that? Because again, the data are shared. Maybe, for example, only that domain you are using, they are not protecting, actually, they're just not using what you are giving them. Because the moment we start using whatever in the computer, and even if we store in the cloud, it first goes to a server and then goes to the cloud. It doesn't go straightly to the cloud, or doesn't go straightly to our screen. It just have this so fast, and we sometimes don't notice it. We just need to know. I mean, people just need to know. It is very possible someone else can really access to it.
Correct.
Yeah. Any comments or questions? Oh, Damon, please. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you again for your lecture, Kirk. We're very grateful for your informed lecture. Yeah. So what I want to share is a question of discernment, that we teach all our PhD students to be critical in reading whatever they read in a book or article. So we need to discern whether what is being said is true or not. And so I think this is true when we use AI, that whatever comes out of AI, we also need to be critical, because first of all, it can give you good material or wrong material. We don't know. And also those material that it give you, which may seem to be good, they're also based on human writings that the GPT or the AI has collected over the internet. So I think discernment is critical, evaluation as human beings. The second thing is that we need to understand all this AI algorithm. They are only simulation of human intelligence. They are actually not human beings. So AI does not actually have the image of God. does not actually have consciousness, does not actually have ethical values. So it's trying to simulate all those, but it's actually not the real thing. So I think we need to understand the ontology of AI as well as its functions. So otherwise it would just be a black box. And there is, even for me, if I'm not careful, that it can be kind of go to AI for all question and become an idol, it can solve all my problem. So it is a human construct, and therefore it's fallible, and it does not have the image of God. It doesn't have the spirit. It cannot interact with the spirit of God. It does not have consciousness and moral values, but it is very useful too. I shared my experience before that I was taking some drugs, which makes it very difficult for me to sleep well. I didn't know about it. And I went to the pharmacist and said, well, he did a very quick Google search. Your drugs has nothing to do with sleeplessness. But so the problem continues. So then one day I asked ChatGPT, is this drug related to insomnia? And he said, yes, some people do have this problem. And I didn't trust it. I said, give me the website, the reliable website, which give us data about it, and it give me several websites. And so I went to those websites and said, lo and behold, some people did report. So I stopped taking the drugs. The same night I slept well, better than before. So no, I'm we got to be very careful. We can't trust AI all the times, but sometimes it works. So we got to try it, but we have to be discerning. You see, it can save your life in some way, but it can also destroy your life.
Thank you.
So be very careful.
Thank you. I think one of the things I'm sure Kirk wanted to respond before that. I agree with Damon that at the moment the intelligence in the word artificial intelligence really does not relate to human intelligence. It relates to algorithm and machine learning, and many of the AI scholars they do not still have they have not agreed with the definition what is the intelligence in human intelligence in that sense. And that is why the generative AI they are because of their lack of understanding or I would say agreement with understanding of the intelligence related to human intelligence. They have not come to the point to say so when the generative AI in relation to intelligence would come, still it will take a bit longer. What we have now is based on the algorithm and machine learning, and still is pretty good. But that is why it's called artificial intelligence in that sense. Kirk, do you want to comment on what Damon said?
Damon shared that last week, and so it's a good example, and I mean, just on the practical level, of course, it's why we already see AI medical people, it's why we see AI virtual teaching assistants and others that are, specialized models that are just focusing on how can it help us with medical advice or whatever kind of advice that we might need. And so we're going to see more and more of that. When it comes to research, I think we're going to see things there as well, special tools that will be designed just to help researchers do their work more effectively. Coming to your point, Sarah, about machines and artificial intelligence, of course, the pundits believe that we're heading for artificial general intelligence. It's just a question of when, and that's when and then we go to superintelligence where it surpasses human intelligence. And maybe the space for us as Christian scholars is to make sure we're engaging already in where AI is right now so that we can keep bringing the human factor in and the ethical concerns. Not that we will necessarily get heard, but the more that our own scholars are working in the space and creating good material and able to contribute to the conversation may actually help calm down some of the hype that is out there, that what all the things that AI is going to do for us. If you've met an AI evangelist, somebody who is so dedicated to it in their sphere of work, they're very hard to convince otherwise, even if they're Christians, that there are some concerns around its use and its replacement of human beings. It's the thinking that it's smarter than us and so forth. They may not see it that way at all. So I think, how do we get into this space as scholars, even if it's new for us? And you know, sure, if it helps us produce materials, if it helps us translate materials that we're producing for OCMS purposes, and then gets that into other languages and so forth, or easier English, all of those make sense. Those are not difficult things for AI to do. But even in John's case, Robert's case, it was, he's still very involved in the process. And I think it's when we see books being generated by AI that actually had no humans involved, and they read that way and are passed off as good material, then, you know, that's an example of where we as scholars have just sort of let the thing down. And so how do we robustly engage in this space? I think if we can be encouraged, all of us, just to do a little bit more and start engaging with it, then we can start making contributions and seeing how it's going to help us more and more, and where the concerns are, and then how, and responding to Damon as well about the whole discernment area. It's something you don't hear a lot talked about yet, particularly from the pundits, this need for discernment. Instead, you're presented often with the ways they're reducing the percentage of hallucinations. So the paid models hallucinate less and less than the free versions. And so they would say, well, that's the solution, but that's not discernment. And so I think we need to think more and more what that discernment space looks like as well.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Kirk, well, I used to run a television station. I remember we had a strategic meeting in 2004, and mainly in relation to the internet. And I remember in that meeting, we were talking about the majority world, and at that time we were concerning about North Africa, and they will supersede in the sense of a fast movement in relation to the internet and Wi-Fi, even to the West, because they are much more, the Wi-Fi become cheaper, become faster, and everyone will have access to it. And it comes through the air and penetrate all the places, and people will be easier. That is why we wanted to see how we can strategize our use of Wi-Fi and AI in relation to broadcasting or these things. And now we are in 2024, and those things which predicted in 2004, let's say in our meetings, and several books written about it, interestingly, it didn't come as it should. For example, still, though majority of people do have access to the mobile phones, to the smartphones, but still from the literacy, technological literacy, they are really not there. And another thing, they are mainly consumers, and most of the places still the governments have the monopoly of, let's say my country, Iran. Everyone uses it, but still lots of things are filtered and they are not able. And then the bandwidth is so low and all these things, but still after those 20 years after that, still we don't see that really ability to broadcast very high quality, sometimes the things to, for let's say to people to use it, because still we are not there. And now sometimes I think the people in the developed countries, they are more optimistic. Sometimes they are too optimistic how that would really go through that within the majority world. My concern is always majority world, and I love technology, and I love AI, and I love all these things. But at the end of the day, my focus is those parts of the world. How do you see that? Do you think the world is too optimistic about this, creating a kind of equality, bringing all this amazing promises they are now giving to us about this AI things?
Well, I would suggest that's definitely the way the proponents would speak of it, but at the same time they may not be that familiar or concerned about the grassroots issues that you just raised, and so therefore the solution would be in their minds perhaps, well, Elon Musk will have more Starlinks up in space in due course, and that will just make it more and more accessible in terms of access of technology. The affordability issue, already I think we see, you know, a high percentage of mobile phone usage around the world. That data is supported by organizations like YouVersion with its Bible app, where they now have the Bible, and I haven't looked for a while, but it was over 1,700 versions of many of the world's languages, and Wycliffe and other SILs and Bible societies working that way. So you know, the technology continues to roll out, the access to it continues to increase and improve, the costs continue to come down. So the pundits would say, the proponents would say, these are not really big concerns for us. Technology will rule, technology will win. And I think that's where it went from the ethical side of where some of these authors that I mentioned at the end are really digging into some of the things we haven't yet talked about on this webinar, things like energy use, the amount of energy, for example, and this comes into technology access, because evidently right now to do a search on a ChatGPT type prompt takes up to 10 to 30 times more energy than a Google search. And so that gives you some idea of scale in terms of energy use. So therefore, if you have a slow data connection because you're in a remote area of the world, then naturally you're going to get really, really frustrated with ChatGPT because probably you can barely use Google, but you might be able to access the Bible app, YouVersion, because of just the way that particular set of technology works. So it's going to probably become more uneven, even though the pundits would say technology will solve all of these issues. I think we live in that real world where we get through the hype and realize that actually it's not going to serve big chunks of our audience. But maybe that's why you have places like OCMS where scholars can come and have access to good technology, get their work done, and then go back to their various places where the technology isn't as good and still be able to do a significant amount of use of technology while they're with you there. I think that we just are going to continue to hear a lot of hype, and I think we will see progress, but I think it will still be a very uneven world, as we've seen already.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments, concerns? We still have 10 minutes left.
Damon has one question.
Yeah.
Damon,
I wonder how soon it will
is that
become.
a Tyrian question?
Yeah. I wonder how long it will become necessary for students to state in their thesis that whether the thesis has been done with the help of AI or not. I wonder what the university policy is.
And I think there's probably others in the room who can speak to it. What I'm seeing is institutions and universities are having to move very, very quickly in this space and put policies up very quickly about what can and cannot be used. And some might take a very cautious approach. Better to say no now and then add yes later. If you follow that traffic idea that I put up, where you actually have three sort of yellow areas, if you think about it, some of them are quite difficult to achieve. How would the student reference their work that they did in AI? Some suggest that it appears in an appendices, And this seems to get quite complex, but it will be no doubt your accrediting universities that are going to make those sort of criteria. The interesting thing to me is, and I don't sit on the policy side, is here we are, ChatGPT came out in November 2022, yet so many universities in July 2024 are still struggling to figure out what kind of policy should be in place. And so the students of today may not be affected, but the students next year will be. And the students of the future will be coming into these programs already probably quite conversant with AI tools and just expecting to be able to use them, and maybe quite shocked if they're quite limited in that. So things have to move quickly, but at the same time, they have to be done sensibly. And maybe that's why universities in general seem to be quite slow figuring out, well, what's the approach to take. I think, as we talked about maybe last week, and in other circles, is institutions have to be sure that the award they are awarding, like a PhD, is warranted, and that you've done the hard work, the thought, the critical thinking, and that in no way has been taken away or, as some would say, dumbed down or replaced by the use of AI. And some would struggle more and more even with the use of Grammarly, because Grammarly can actually be doing a lot of that critical editing work that can be quite helpful if you're not putting guardrails around that. So I think this is just going to be a bigger and bigger challenge pressing upon all institutions. But it's just interesting that here we are, quite a bit of time after ChatGPT was released, still trying to figure out where do we even go with this. And I think it just shows how much it caught us by surprise.
Yeah, I now remember there is a question that both examiners of the Viva have to answer. There's a question in the form, the university official form. The question is the following: is the thesis the work of the students?
That is the question.
That is a real question, and the examiner through the Viva have to judge whether the thesis was written by the students.
Or perhaps that question also need to be added in the form they signed.
Yeah, so that's a real, I mean, that question will become more complicated in the future. You know, it's written by the student, but by the student with the aid of AI, things that you can.
Or even if early drafts were done with AI, but final drafts were not.
It's become a very complicated question. I can see that question will need to be tested. I don't know how.
This 𝒂𝒄𝒄 theology.
Yes. Is anyone okay, Robert? That will be the final question. Please do go ahead.
Oh, actually, my wife is taking doctoral ministry course at Fuller, and Fuller does not allow using ChatGPT in any of their work at this point. But I think their policy will change. I was with Dr. 𝒊𝒏𝒊𝒔𝒊𝒏𝒈 at where was it? Jakarta last week, and I met Oral Roberts University AI professor. So Oral Roberts embraces it completely. And so there's a huge tension between academic world. But I think in terms of knowing where AI is going, I think ORU, I think it is better to have a department and deal with it instead of saying that you cannot use it, because 45% of high school students in America is using ChatGPT to turn in papers. So 45%. So, and all those kids gonna go to college. So, and then for seminary to say that you cannot do that, I think we may be way behind. We'll be almost like Christian going against cars, saying that God did not make us go as fast, you know, other than horse, you know. So I think that's something we really need to process.
Thank you. And so can you please join me to say thank you to Kirk for another really very interesting lecture. Thank you all of you who attend on Zoom and in this room. And we are going back to use ChatGPT now and write another book for us, our first book. Thank
All right,
you.
goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
We're going to 11 o'clock.